So just quickly, I want to talk about 3 case studies that we did as part of the conversion project, and then I'm going to hand over to Mark and David to talk about their view. And really, learnings from the retail sector, applying these methods, we were pretty surprised that there was no one-size-fits-all solution. We would try an image zoom on one company, and we'd try it on another, and it wouldn't work the same. One would be higher improvement in conversion, one would be lower. And it was really interesting to see how counterintuitive our tests could be, and really see that sometimes what you think is right is not always right. We've heard a lot about the hippo today. We see this across the board. Take a guess at what the test is going to turn up, and you'll be amazed by sometimes what happens. So the first one was starting at the marketing effectiveness side of things. So sometimes it's easier to start at your checkout, sometimes it's easier to start at your landing pages. But with Next, we wanted to work with them to learn about how to lower the bounce rate on some of their traffic. So we looked at traffic that was going around the terms Next Directory and Next Catalog. And we could see that all the PPC traffic was going to a Next Directory, for these terms like Next Directory, Next Catalog, we're going to a Next Directory sign-up page. And we wanted to see why there was a higher bounce rate for these pages versus the terms going to natural search. So we looked at the 2 different pages, and we could see it was a dramatic difference in bounce rate. And we could also see that was because it was completely different journeys for those people typing those terms. So we benchmarked against natural search versus paid search to learn what was wrong there, start to diagnose the issue. And we ended up driving a significant 50-50 of that traffic towards the home page, but with a more of a feel for the Next Directory sign-up. And when we drove people to the home page, we managed to actually double conversion on that traffic, and this is a significant proportion of traffic, and also more than double the revenue from their site on that traffic. Another test we did with Shu, who are here today, was looking at how they could improve the efficiency of their category pages. So we wanted to see if a 3x4, a 3x3 with the model image, or a 2x3 was the most effective way of marketing the products of the category. Any guesses to which one wins? A? Who thinks A? One person? Okay, good. Who thinks B? Uh-huh. And who thinks C? Okay. So, we ran this through Website Optimizer, and, we wanted to see which page was most efficient. And we saw that the 2x3, which was B, had a 6% improvement in conversion. So the wisdom of crowds prevails there. And it's not always just about e-commerce here. It's not always about generating sales from doing testing. Third test that we did was working on the Debenhams sign-up page for the Beauty Club on their beauty homepage. And what we wanted to try was above the fold or below the fold, what's the impact? And we also wanted to try an updated image of the Beauty Club sign-up page. And with the way we designed the experiment, we were able to see the impact of above or below the fold was about 39% improvement in sign-ups. And the impact of the image was about 35% below the fold. And the combined new image plus above the fold was an 89% improvement in sign-ups. So you get that combination effect. That's the beauty of multivariate testing.
Let me just talk a little bit about Accenture Marketing Sciences. It's probably a practice many of you have never heard of. You would, of course, assume that in Accenture we have in our 186,000 people, lots of people involved in web build, web delivery. We build thousands of sites all around the world. That's not me. I can have a technology discussion if you really want me to. But I'm a marketeer by training and an online one at that. And I work in a practice that's solely really there to help work with marketing, the business, sales, whatever you want to kind of wear it, the people that drive the demand and the revenue into the business. We do that across 4 key areas, and I run the digital bit, the bit on the left. You can see some of the brands and some of the guys we work with. And really, I'm just going to try and spend a little bit of my time just talking to you a little bit about what we do, and I'll try and make it a bit more interesting than just a bit of company background with just some of the experiences we've had to date with some of these organisations we've had around. But fundamentally, the digital practice is about what we're talking about today, predominantly about improving conversion, improving whichever term you want to use, return on investment from your online activity, helping you make a better website, helping you understand what's the difference between a good and a bad one. It's all in that kind of that same space. I think I touched on this before. Those of you who are awake in the session this morning, certainly by the time I finished talking at least. You know, one of the big challenges, one of the big problems in the online space at the moment is it's hugely fragmented into individual point solutions, and each one of these is being sold as the silver bullet, the thing that's going to fix all of your online problems, whether that be usability or accessibility or the current flavour of the month analytics or whatever the kind of the term. Now they're all important, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying any of these are bad. These are all good, useful, important tools, but the bit that we get, and I get particularly passionate and frustrated about, is actually on their own, they're not going to solve problems. The challenge with all of these tools and understanding the selection of these tools is really understanding what's important to the business, what is good performance, and that might sound, that is the first, and I guarantee it's not the last statement of the obvious I'll make today, in that lots of businesses have a very clear objective. Very few businesses are able to translate that consistently into understanding how web helps them deliver that, particularly when you get into the discussions around the different owners. I don't know much about any of your businesses, but I suspect there are some in the room that would recognise some of the challenges of that everybody owns a little bit of the pie. How do you deliver a consistent, clear understanding of web delivery, web performance, what good looks like, when you've got every man and his dog who is A, an expert, of course, because they've used the website, but B, I used to make TV ads, you know, everybody's an expert on TV ads because we've all watched them. It's a little bit different. It's the same challenge online, but how do you, when everybody wants a piece of the pie, whether that's the sales guy or the channel guy or the customer services guy, everybody wants their bit, and it's very often the best place where we see this, or indeed the worst place where we see this expressed, is the battle for the homepage and some of the challenges, and we see some organisations. Actually, it's pretty visible. I go and talk to a lot of organisations all over the world about this stuff, and I go and look at clearly. I try and do a bit of research before I go in and look at their sites. And very often, you can get a good indication of what it's like internally just by looking at the homepage, because actually, it's often. I won't name it. There's a mobile telecoms operator in the UK. You go and look at their homepage, and I happen to know that internally it's a disaster, and you'd see it reflected in the homepage, because it's actually it's deliberately chunked up into pieces to enable them to allocate bits of the jigsaw to each other on their monthly argument that they have about who's going where. And so we're trying to take a slightly different view of the world, and there are two parts to that slightly different view. Now this is affectionately known as the 9 chevrons. Again, it's Accenture, we do chevrons. I can give you its full title, which is the 9 key capabilities of high-performing web delivery. It's catchy. But the important point in here is one of the big challenges that we also see. So you've got this fragmentation, this challenge internally, but also there's this relationship between marketing and IT. Again, I'm going to use some broad sweeping generalisations, but marketing people are fluffy, not detailed, can't articulate what they want, head in the clouds, blue sky, a bit thick. That's what IT say about you if you didn't already know this. Right? And I know. Right, that IT are slow, inflexible, don't get it, don't understand the customer, don't really get what I need, and are just generally a bit of a pain in the bum. That's what happens in organisations, but where we are positioning what we do in trying to help resolve some of those challenges and get these 9 capabilities kind of all aligned in the same direction is this band in the middle. We see the band in the middle as the potential catalyst, the area where we're focusing on analytics, optimisation and experience, because it's got 2 parts to that story. Firstly, from a pragmatic perspective, it's often the bits that sit between marketing and IT. Analytics is quite often owned by marketing and owned by IT all at the same time, and some of the other areas. But they're actually the areas that have a material impact on the quality of experience and the performance of the site. And I'll come back to what I mean by performance in a moment, but the performance of the site in driving better results. And we think by really focusing on these areas, we're able to, we've done it in several organisations now, bring some degree of unity and clarity, as well as a significant improvement in conversion. So how do we go about it? Well, very simply, again, I was going to say the bleeding obvious, but I won't say that, but the statement of the obvious. Very simple approach, it has to be. Right? There's enough, I think I said it before, enough nonsense in the web space for organisations to confuse the hell out of each other already. We don't want to add to that confusion. We're trying to find some simplicity. Set the right direction, innovate the solution, implement it well, optimise the result. Ongoing stock. Very simple. Now I can talk for hours and hours about each one of those phases, but I won't. But it's the important point around this piece is actually the first one. The one that we often skip over when we have kind of discussions with clients. You know, we know what we're doing, we know what our direction is, we know what we're trying to achieve. But it's only when you really get under the skin around, do you have a really clear articulation of what is important? And again, I've got a very simple view of the world, 4 things. Only 4 things that matter in our experience, only 4 things you can optimize your site for. You want more volume, enjoying a better experience, driving greater conversions at lower cost. Now, the trick, the art, the magic in that is understanding what's the balance of those 4 for you as a particular organisation. And it is a balance. Because I can hack cost out easy, but I'll probably kill conversion and experience. I can create a beautiful experience, but will I actually drive up conversion and probably increase cost? And it's finding and striking the right balance, because I can guarantee in most organisations, most stakeholders will have a very different view of those 4. But once you really understand that, you can begin to select the right tools. And so I talked before about fragmentation and some of the challenges. So these are some of our tools. Right? We've got a really cool thing called Web Evaluator. It benchmarks website experience. We look across 350 sites around the world regularly. We know what the good sites are, what good looks like, and how to draw multi-industry experiences to address key and specific issues. We've got a very cool thing called digital diagnostics. Like it scans your site, it tells you where your issues are. It has a massive material impact on visibility to search engines such as Google. And the optimization piece is the best multivariate testing tool out there. And I say that not lightly. My legal team would shoot me if it wasn't true. But it's built fundamentally on a different set of maths out there to most other things, and it's very clever. Go and look at choice modelling on Wikipedia if you get a minute. It's really cool stuff. But those are tools, and frankly, those may or may not be right for everybody. And there are others that might be equally right that either we have or working with partners and working with Google that they have. The most important point is getting that piece, that top box right. Because once you understand that, we can help select and you can help understand what the right tools are. Kind of how does it work in theory? Well, I'm sure not the first time you've seen a funnel. There were lots of them about. But it's about trying to drive through the overall performance through to something that's important. Now, generically, we've called it lifetime value maximization because it's got to have something that sounds interesting. But it's about driving better return, more money, better performance. And I don't frankly care whether that's a sale, a download, a registration, a login, a bill payment. It makes no difference because actually it's about what is important to you as an organisation for driving value. And there are a set of tools that come before that point that can help. My last slide. Just to hopefully bring on the point about where do we get value from and where do we drive it from, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the areas and some of the numbers that we've kind of achieved. So using a variety of those assets, I mean, search is still, somebody asked the question before, is paid search and search engine stuff kind of dead, or is it old? I kind of think it's mostly still in its infancy from many perspectives. There are so few organisations that are really maximising it, so few people that frankly really understand it, that there's still a huge amount to gain out there. And even using some of our assets in some limited scope and capability, we've been driving 25 to 35% improvement in SEO traffic fairly recently for several organisations, not just in the UK, across the globe, that are driving significant material impacts in the volume of visitors that the sites are achieving based on their placements in natural rankings. When we go through the classic kind of value drivers of grow and retain, sales and cross-sell, well, the utilisation of it, Graham's already touched on NVT, it's very cool, it's very powerful. It's often quite hard conceptually to kind of get your head around as an organisation when it's frankly a struggle to get an A/B test out the door in less than a month or 6 weeks. But it's actually, in most cases done right, actually no more complicated to implement than that A/B test. But that's part of the challenge of trying to break down some of those internal barriers to success and getting some of that consistency and alignment. And actually, lastly, I suppose, in terms of where it's not just about some of the external output performing better. It's about working smarter from an internal perspective. Again, part of our point of view is around. I'm presenting next week in Cannes, and part of that presentation to a bunch of basically creatives is the web models a bit broken. Because we talk a lot about wanting this agility and being able to respond to Twitter and be active and real-time and learning and growing. But most organisations' IT development program is what you do is you write a set of requirements that you can't really articulate, and then you sit on them for 6 months, or if you're lucky, if not nearer to 18 months, while IT build them, and by which time it's not what you wanted in the first place. So there's some big challenges around how we help using these assets and that ongoing cycle to massively accelerate that ability to iterate, to learn quickly, to change. It can be quite scary, right? Because it's no longer do you have the comfort of being able to produce a set of requirements, and if IT build it, actually it's not there. It's not your fault because IT built the wrong thing. Testing live with real consumers with their real experiences on your site. It's massively powerful. We are just running some tests where we've just helped a bank improve conversion on savings accounts by 297% by running a test. We've been working with eBay and improved their conversion by 25%. We are, there could be a very long list of people and organisations that we're working with that actually we're having some material impacts, not just on the performance of the site, but the way that they're operating and the way that they go about the whole challenge.
Hello everyone, my name is David Ellis. I am Head of Performance Measurement at EMC Conchango. It's great to be here. If some of you haven't heard of EMC Conchango, I've got a slide if it works. Ooh. Nope. There we are. With some of our clients, but I'm here to talk to you about conversion and optimization thereof. So, why is this important? And why? Aha. There we are. Well, I'd like you to imagine that in a real world, you're running a real shop. Many of you actually are from online retailers, but there are also many of you from a bricks and mortar, for want of an old term, from that environment. And if you imagine running your stores without analysing how many people you've got coming through your doors and where they go, what they buy when they get there and how much they spend on each transaction, how much stock you've got in store and how much stock you've got in the warehouse, and then doing that without store managers, the people on the ground to start analysing and interpreting this data and doing something about it and making decisions. And then I'd like you to think about how you're going to start increasing and optimising your revenues and your profits. And yet, as has been mentioned all day, or at least a couple of times throughout the day, many companies online are still doing just that. The analytics data is getting better, but very often people aren't analysing the data properly. They don't have the people or the resources in place to start looking at the data properly. So we can't imagine that sort of scenario either, and that is why optimization and the data that underpins it, as Mark has just said, is so crucial. So, what is EMC Conchango's approach to optimization? Well, we call it experience planning. Experience planning incorporates three elements, but the experience planning is generally done right up front as part of the construction of a new site launch. So it's akin, if you like, to traditional ad planning. And it establishes the strategies based on fact-based insights to deliver real, valuable experiences. And when we talk about valuable experiences, we mean that to the consumer and to the company as well. As part of that, the fact-based insights come from a whole range of data that we can get our hands on, so whatever is involved, and that very often is analytics, but it ranges from usability tests to visitor satisfaction surveys to increasingly the social metrics you can get from tracking blogs and Twitter and such things. We also, at this point, set up the key KPIs and the metrics that you need to measure on an ongoing basis, so this relates back to your overall objectives. That's crucial because then you can't, as we've said, many people have said all day, you can't track that back to real business objectives and true performance. So yeah, performance metrics are vital. The process is also really important because it defines the entire overall customer experience across all the digital channels. So it establishes the principles that you're going to use and the framework by which you're going to implement them. So you have that across the whole experience. And again, that's been something that's been coming out quite a lot today. That then gets crystallized into a creative brief, ultimately, which then feeds through the experience design process at which all of the designs and the brand executions are delivered. And then we move on to experience management. Now, it's important to have that background because without that framework, you're going to really struggle to make experience management work. But experience management is really what we're here for today, and it's here that we start driving the real conversion improvements and the optimization. Why is it important? Well, I guess you wouldn't probably be here if you didn't know that already, but it's about optimizing the sites that you've already got. This isn't about great big new builds, this is about sweating your assets. It's about making sure that you can really improve what you've already got. It's about delivering and proving you're delivering ROI, and by that I mean return on investment, not just return on innovation, as was talked about earlier. And again, and crucially, it's based on insight and not guesswork, and this is where that process of gathering the facts from the data available is crucial. So that's, if you like, a summary of what that is. That only really differs from experience planning and on the basis that this is an ongoing process. Obviously, it's more iterative, it's more rapid, and it involves different deliverables, but fundamentally, the process is very similar. That's kind of what it looks like. This is a little bit like Graham's slide from earlier, but I had to make it into a circle because that's how we think. And in essence, it's the same point again. So we come up with the strategies, we implement them, we see how they're doing, we learn from that, we analyse the data, and we gather what we've got to improve that, and then we identify the opportunities and take that forward. So it's not quite as easy as that sounds. It's a nice circle, but there are some things that you need to consider that in order to make this successful. And these are some points that we highlight to clients to make sure the experience management piece can actually work, because there are very often, as Mark says, issues around the implementation. And the first point, and again this has come out again and again today, is establish a test and learn culture. So if you're not thinking about constant optimization and this fascination with improvement and the facts that you've got available, it's not really going to take off. It needs to be a cultural thing. As part of that also, you then need to give responsibility to the teams you've got on the ground, people who are closest, if you like, to the interfaces, to the designs, to make sure they can deliver the best practice and the best results. If you've got a great big long list of sign-off procedures to get this done, it's not going to work. It's never going to have the flexibility and agility to make it fly. Now, this is an interesting one because it often gets missed. Be experimental. The interesting thing about these tools, and I'm particularly talking about multivariate testing and behavioural targeting increasingly, is you can be experimental. You can take some risks with the interfaces and the designs, because actually the tools allow you to manage that risk. If it's going to be an absolute stinker, you'll know very quickly and you can do something about it, which means you actually liberate your designers and your agencies to really make that brand essence sing and see if it works. Again, you need to be very clear on your objectives. If you're trying to do too many different things, particularly on any particular page, and the home page from Mark's example earlier is an excellent one, you have to be very clear. It's not going to work if you have too many objectives, and ultimately you're going to get very confused in trying to manage that. Again, this is the kind of the IT bit. Get stakeholders involved up front. The more they see how this is going to work, because it does involve a change of process and a change of technology involved, the more they see that up front, the more likely they're going to get on board with it, and then you'll have a smoother process for going forward. And then the last couple of points on this, you've got to have someone to analyse the data. If you don't have that, as we just said, it's not going to work. This data is now getting increasingly complicated with analytics and indeed the MVT tools that are available. And as part of that, you need to stop thinking in terms of most popular pages, which is a very common way of looking at analytics, you need to start thinking about user flows. So not just a long list of these are my top places, but how do people get to them? Where are they going when they get there? Is that dropout there any good? We need to start thinking about these dropouts. And if you're not thinking in those terms, you're going to miss the opportunity to optimize. And the point that finally there's absolutely no point in doing any of this if you're not going to change it. You need to really have that learning culture in place again. There is one point on that. At the same time, don't try and change absolutely everything just because you can. But again, it's another temptation with these fantastic new tools. You can have a lot, play with them an awful lot. That isn't really going to sing, because if you come back to your objectives and again the experience planning principles that we mentioned earlier, you'll have a framework which will allow you to make sure you're optimizing the right bit, but not touching other areas which are more crucial to the overall business. So, a couple of examples, and this is where you have to, I'm afraid, wake up and stick your arms in your air for a couple of minutes. This is an example of a button, obviously, on a registration form. Which would you say is the most effective? This is if you like, a real test. So, hands up for register me. Okay, and hands up for click here to register. Very good, very good. That button alone, just on its own, drove 3% increase in conversions in terms of that form, so people getting through to registration. That's really quite a significant uplift. Most of you got it, well done. I'd say that's about 70-30, excellent. So that's a really good example of why this is valuable. That's 3% just on that element. And if you just start thinking about the whole page, then that can be quite interesting. Now here's another one. This is EMC Conchengo, we actually eat our own dog food, to use that term. So this is actually something that we have. And it's a link that the image is associated with the link through to a case study associated, as you might be able to tell, with oil and gas. So, which of these images would you expect to generate the most amount of click-throughs to that content? It's got nothing to do with a link, which is separate, but which of those would you say? So we've got drums, we've got can, we've got person. So, hands up for drums. 1, okay. And the can. And the person. You're very, very good. What's interesting about this is that the click-throughs to that case study went up by 50%. Now that was totally unexpected, frankly. That's a really quite significant increase, and it's worth just thinking about that. The other point around this here is this is about optimization in general. This isn't just about conversion. This is effectively about content on the site to get people more engaged. And again, that's another metric. You're desperately trying to say something, yes?
Did anybody notice that from her perspective it's actually going down?
I'm not sure it is. There is an arrow, but it's an interesting question. But yeah, so it's the interesting point about this is that this is about understanding your individual site and in your individual business. And the other point about the previous example is don't all start writing down click here to register is the best, absolutely the best practice. The point is that this is effectively challenging best practice in a sense. You will understand while you do this on your own sites how effective the particular content is going to be for you, and it's about challenging best practice and received wisdom, if you like, rather than anything else. So there we are. If anyone has any questions, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I think we'll fire. We'll do questions. Mark, do you want to come up here as well? I think a key theme you're finishing on there is really we've been hearing a lot today. Is nobody knows the right answer. Nobody necessarily knows if it's going to be. You've got to look at the data, make the decisions. It's a pretty exciting space with all the information you have online these days. So does anybody have any questions to start things off? I'll repeat the questions in case you can't hear.
Kieran from oneofthose.com. In the conversion framework, you've got marketing effectiveness, website usability, and you've got products and services. Now, for marketing effectiveness and website usability, we're fairly comfortable in analysing those elements and seeing what effect the conversion is. I mean, but I struggle with products and service offering to understand what effect that's having on conversion, and whether there's any KPIs out there that would show what the underlying range is of conversion, whether there's any effect actually on products, even what effect the actual range is having on conversion.
It's a good question. Did everybody hear that? So the question is, looking at the Google framework that we showed up there about marketing effectiveness, website usability, products and services offering, it's fairly easy to understand how data and KPI setting can help you measure marketing effectiveness and web usability. But how do you use information and data and testing to measure products, pricing, products and services offering? The answer is it's complicated, and I'm going to defer here after my first quick attempt at this. But at the end of the day, testing prices on different people can have a negative effect on your customers. They feel like they're going to be charged more, some are charged less. Is that the right thing to do? I'm not the expert to say here. Delivery, for instance, we did a test with one company where we offered free delivery, improved conversions by 30%. And we did that for a limited amount of time. And these sort of things help you measure in the impact of doing these types of changes. I don't know, Mark, what's your take on this?
I'd split it slightly in that I'd differentiate the difference between some of what we're talking about in terms of testing and optimizing the experience, and also selecting and understanding next best offer. Sorry, I'm back. So I was just, if you didn't hear me, I was kind of saying, trying potentially a different way to think about the problem or the question is splitting it. Is that there's a whole piece around that we've talked a lot about today in MVT and other testing techniques to try and understand how do you deliver the optimum mix of stuff, images, pictures, promotion, ideas, to get the consumer that's on your site to do the thing you want them to do. But there's the other piece of the jigsaw is, well, what's the thing that you want them to do? And that's going to be very different for different segments, and that actually can be a much bigger part of the appropriate product, service, pricing model that you need to select. So I would like my high value customers to sign up for X versus my low value customers who I'd like to clear up. No, but there's a different desired outcome that you want to achieve. Then there's the piece around, well, how do I optimize my content, my assets, my tools to help them achieve that desired outcome?
David, your perspective on this?
Yes, it's interesting. So the other point around this is that you can start looking at the segments of customers that you might start targeting particular offers or products for, and seeing how that works. And so that principle of defining them, and of course you can then identify them and just serve that group of people if you can define that increasingly through behavioural targeting or whatever. So you can start identifying that group and just serving that content and see how that performs. So again, you can if you like throttle it back and not just run it across everyone. You can come up with particular targets, and you can also interestingly start thinking about product development around those same segments. So again, if you're looking at online panels, for example, to start looking at how new product development might work and whether there's a test bed that you can start driving people through and seeing whether it works. So I think, again, that gets you increasingly to sort of social media questions, but I think there really is an opportunity to start using, again, we're talking about innovation here, aren't we, about using some of these techniques and the digital channels in general to drive that innovation in product development.
Have we any other questions? Another question? Yes?
Have you got any tips for sites which are quite low volume, so that running a test would take ages? You only had a 2% increase, say.
So the question is, tips on running sites or pages with very low volume. How do you run tests? And if you're talking about a multivariate test with 100 variations, very difficult to do that, to run a lot of because essentially you've got to test everybody through a version of that page. David, what's your take on that?
Do it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think there are practicalities around that. So you start constructing the test differently. So you don't, as Graham says, test absolutely everything. You test very specific elements. You might do, again, one of the more obvious ways is to start just doing A/B testing and having really quite big differences between the two, and seeing how that goes. That will start showing. It might take a bit of time, but it will start showing up in terms of traffic. But if you start doing great big complicated MVT tests, that's going to be a little bit more difficult. But principally, follow that process again. It's that test and learn culture. And if you're not doing it simply because you're not getting the traffic, well, do it anyway and then find out. Is what I'd say.
Mark, does this choice modeling here?
Well, yeah. I touched on that. The way that we do MVT using choice modelling is very sample size efficient, right? But it's kind of, we're getting into a bit of a, well, my product's better than your product kind of, what. It's not about that. It's much more about, it's kind of David's point around, you kind of, yes, of course you're constrained, right? So you can't do super complex stuff if you haven't got the visitor volumes, but there's ways you can design tests and use the software to make it happen. But it's much more about the culture, frankly. And it's much more about building in that test and learn methodology, and whether it's, I'd much rather, that we were working alongside an organisation that was doing 100 small tests than one big one, right? Because that's much more about, you've got that cultural difference, the way that you try and learn and test and iterate. And frankly, you'll get 10 out of those 100 tests completely horrifically wrong. Right? But that's the point. And overcoming that fear, that challenge, often isn't the marketing guys. Actually, it's obviously, often the CFO who's very nervous about the money you're going to waste, or the sales director who's worried about the leads you're going to drop, or it's getting through that learning piece, that cultural change to enable then the learning piece, and then kind of worry about the mechanics of how you make them as complex and as impactful as you can.
We had another question there.
Nick Marley, Waitrose. Question around content, really. Are you seeing how we're using content, or the change in how we're using content in the retail space affecting our conversion? So the obvious one being the impact of user-generated content for ratings and reviews had a significant effect. But now with all the social media, all the rich media and everything, there's so many more things that we could be using. Are you seeing a trend to move towards that?
Yes. Short answer, but yeah, yes. There are retailers, we are seeing them increasingly exploit. Clearly, ratings and stuff is old news, but it's amazing how many people still don't do it, or do it very well, and haven't figured out a way. It's often a bolt-on or hidden, or somewhere down. Haven't found a way to bring that to the forefront. So we've seen some interesting sites. Kids, kiddie care. They've actually got rid of all their own content. First thing you see is ratings, and it's other people's reviews on the products that you search on their site. I'm not saying that's right for everybody. I'm not even sure it's right for them. But it's a different way of flipping that whole question on its head. Don't bother producing content. Provide the frameworks for other people to access the content and own that journey.
Yeah, there's not much to add. Yeah, I think the ratings and reviews is just beginning to start really demonstrating provable value. I think that's, it's been in play long enough for people to turn around and say, yes, actually, that's no longer just a bit of a punt, that really is working. I think the same principle will sort of continue as people experiment with new areas. But yeah, I think there's not much further to add, but it will definitely continue, and you'll start working out which ones are most effective by following, again, these same principles.
I think the key is to test it, try it out, see what works for you. I know when Amazon first did ratings and reviews, it was probably hurt their business a little bit, taking a risk, having people see that a product doesn't work, but testing it, key way forward.
There's another point around that, actually, which practically by definition, measurement processes lag behind the innovation of developments themselves. So generally, people wait to see if it's worth measuring something to the level of sophistication we're talking about until it's sort of taken off a little bit. So there will always be this process where you're measuring slightly behind the curve, and you have that the innovation as the founders were talking about earlier, that innovation period when you can sort of play around a bit. And so again, test it, see how it works, but equally you'll then start establishing these metric frameworks that allow you to start proving the value over time.
Headley.
Headley at Summit Media. What's your view on how to dovetail and use usability studies with multivariate testing? Obviously, okay, analytics will tell you what happened, and typically usability gives you some insight into intention. But you know, it's a much more complex thing. So, what advice would you give the audience?
There's two answers. So I think usability testing is very useful in the process of understanding potentially why consumers are doing what they're doing on your site. My hesitation is you need to be careful on how it's not fact. It isn't black and white. In that it's when we talk about I'm sure lots of you run focus groups. You said a bunch of people in a room have a drink of coffee. Which ad would you prefer if you saw it? Well, that's essentially what we've just done with some of those other examples, and I could put some other ones up that are a bit meaner and a bit more complex, and I guarantee you won't get them right, because one of the case studies we use is one for eBay. It's 4,096 page combinations. There's a 378% performance difference between the best and the worst. It's just impossible. Occasionally somebody gets really lucky, and a usability study will give you some qualitative insights, but it won't give you the quantitative, and won't actually be an accurate prediction of future behaviour. Whereas if you base your decisions and the assessment on the data, you can have some confidence in making the changes and rolling that further forward.
I think you really got to do both. One is the what.
Yep.
What's the problem? Analytics tells you what the problem is. So does usability, but in a smaller, less statistically significant number. But the why, you struggle to get that from analytics data. The why are people reacting to this? That is a very qualitative data source and a necessity to then do a test with. Because if you just try and jump from the what to the test, you might out the why. And if you just go from the why to the test, you might test the wrong thing, and you end up spending a lot of time testing something that doesn't add back.
Yeah, great. The important point in the tests, we use a very deliberate word, experiment.
Yeah.
Right? The word is deliberately chosen because of its scientific connotations, right? It's a scientific process, and the start of that process is building your hypothesis. I think my hypothesis is changing that button from register me to click here to register will improve conversion. Prove true or untrue. Prove or disprove the hypothesis. And in order to try and understand those hypotheses and create them in the first place, that's where the usability stuff is very helpful, because it gives you those indications where a consumer anecdotally will go, I didn't realise what that button meant. Right, okay, we've got something to kind of work on to try and drive that piece forward.
Hypothesis-driven testing, I think it's one of the most important things in this area.
Is there any way to test usability with a real customer who's just arrived at your website?
In a short answer, yes. There are lots of ways of doing it.
MVT.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you were talking about usability studies in the sort of sense of sitting down with a coffee.
No, this would be live on a site.
Yeah, so live on site where you get someone who genuinely wants the product.
Yeah.
Comes to your site and you can talk to that person while you sort of hijack him. You arrive and you say, "Will you help me with this? I'll give you some money." And he says, "Yeah, I don't get that button up there. What's that?" Because the problem I have with usability is they're not genuine customers.
So there's a couple of points there. The first bit is you can do that through sort of online surveys, so you can get that sort of feedback through as you come
That's
through.
not what I'm after. I don't want a guy who's willing to fill in a survey. I want a guy who hasn't got time for it.
Challenge the question a little bit. Okay, what do you want to get out of that? What do you want to observe?
I just want genuine customers that are really, at the 100 people that come into my site, one's buying, or 3 are buying.
Yeah.
I want genuine. I don't want tests done that some marketers got out of a car park somewhere. I want real people who are really looking for the product that I'm selling.
And that's
one of my 97 have gone, where have they gone? I can't get that.
Simplistic.
Testing.
Yes, you can.
I can't get that qualitative.
You can't get the quantitative, but you can turn that 3 to 7.
Yeah, no, I accept that. But you were saying usability is worth doing, and in the sense that it's worth doing, I was wondering whether you can do it with real people.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the industry is trying to, with multivariate testing and A/B testing. You are essentially going onto a site, and a lot of these experiments we showed today are people going onto the site, wanting to do something, they're not being observed, or they don't know they're necessarily being observed, and they're going and completing actions, and it's being measured about what they saw and what they did. And you say, if this person does this, and they visited my site once before, and they did this is what they saw, and they actually did what we want them to do. Well, this person saw this, and they didn't do what we want them to do, so we know that that doesn't work for that person. And I think that, a lot of the technology out there, the website optimizers, the Optimos, the Accenture, digital optimization, all these different solutions look at doing that in real time. And I think what we're trying to talk about today is how do you bring all of it together? Because in isolation, it doesn't work. You can't just do the user groups, as you're saying. You can't just do the testing. You can't just do the analytics. It's about bringing it all together and trying to build that solution for your customer.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, because this is beginning to be kind of an MVT Q&A almost. The solution to all of your problems is not MVT. It might be. It might be one of the solutions, but it could just as easily be the quality of the navigation around the site. It could be your internal processes. It could be any number of other issues that are inhibiting and restricting the site performance from a conversion perspective. MVT is very powerful, very new-ish, very cool. So I understand that kind of stuff, but I think there's an important point around the overall conversion is to take our view would be to take a step back and try and understand where the real issues lie. MVT might well be then the answer, but let's start from the right distance with the telescope the right area.
So we have time for one more question. Yes, there we go.
What would you say is a good and bad bounce rate?
Ooh, what would you say is a good and bad bounce rate? Well, Avinash Koshak, which is Google's analytics evangelist, says 30% is a good bounce rate. Now that's fairly ambiguous because 30% applies to all your traffic. So it differs by industry and it differs by channel. So Google paid search is going to be different to Google natural search. Direct site traffic is going to be different to your email marketing. But I would say I've seen bounce rates as low as 5%. I've seen them as high as 70%. I would say the average or successful good PPC bounce rate is anywhere between 5 and 15%. That's doing really well, between 5 and 15% bounce rate.
PPC?
With paid search, yeah.
Natural?
Natural search, it differs. I don't know enough about the benchmarking in natural search, but it is everybody familiar with bounce rate? One of the best metrics in analytics. It's so simple, you can't argue with it. Somebody went to your site and they left your site after the first page. So either your page was the conversion and then you did very well, or you can improve on your visitors coming into your site.
I think that's quite an important point there about effectively there being lots of bounce rates. So yes, you might have an overall understanding of a sort of general benchmark, but actually when you start looking underneath the bonnet, as it were, you can then start breaking that up into different behavioural groups or different targeting groups, and then start to understand how your overall bounce rate is made up, and then you can start measuring and tweaking particular areas where you might be underperforming or whatever it might be. So I think that's quite an important point about breaking your view up into, if you like, lots of mini funnels rather than one great big one. To come back to the funnel metaphor.
Yeah. I've got very little to add to that. Fine, my only comment is whatever the bounce rate is, it'll probably make you better.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank Mark Inskip and David Ellis for their wisdom today.